Brian Kelly recaps day one of fall camp and touts one position group as the deepest he's ever coached. You'll hear it next. Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get great podcasts. Of course, on YouTube as well, so please subscribe. And as always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. Tigers wrapped up day one of fall camp. They'll have 21 practices before they get into game week for Clemson. One down, 20 to go. And every time that Brian Kelly allows the media access, I'll be there. I'll tell you how it goes. If you missed our previous episode, I dropped it immediately after practice. So I gave you all of my practice observations. If you're watching us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network, thank you so much. Make sure you check out that podcast, either podcast or on YouTube. Well, after practice, Brian Kelly met with reporters. So my aim here is to kind of let you hear what I thought Kelly said that was interesting, and we'll react to it here. And one of the things that was most notable, and it was actually, I had the first question out the chute in the press conference, it was about why they only spent an hour and 15 minutes at practice, because normally fall camp is a grind. It's these hours-long practices as your team gets used to the South Louisiana heat. You're becoming conditioned. It's all a build-up toward your opener to have your team conditioned. Well, the Tigers were inside for stretch, and then about 15 minutes, 3 periods. Then they went outside for about another 45 minutes, and that was a wrap. And Brian Kelly explained why.
Well, I think this is all about acclimatization, right? We're going to have 7 days where you have to acclimatize your football team. So we felt like the data that we have compiled over the last 3 years relative to short-term soft tissue injuries, we wanted to be able to increase the player load each and every day. So we'll go from 12 to 16 to 18 to 20. We'll go 4 days. We'll have a day off. We'll go 3 days and have a day off. So within that first 7 is the highest incident for soft tissue injuries. We want to make sure that we get through these 7 days acclimatized without any soft tissue injuries and 2 recovery days. So then we can get into really 2 weeks of camp and, obviously game week prep. We'll have 3 weeks to duplicate our process.
I love the end part there, the 3 weeks to duplicate the process, because understand typically how a fall camp goes is it's 2 weeks of fall camp where it's technique, it's basic things like that, it's conditioning. Then you have effectively a week of install, and then it's game week. So that's typically how fall camp goes. Brian Kelly saying the way that they've structured it is the acclimatization period over 7 days, and then they're going to have 3 weeks, effectively, the remaining 2 weeks of the 21 days we talked about, and then game week against Clemson to effectively work on themselves. I don't know what's right or wrong. Listen, this is my 19th fall camp, my 19th season covering LSU football, and I've seen Les Miles do it. I've seen Ed Ogeron do it. Now I've seen Brian Kelly do it. And every coach has their different way. But Les Miles was a grind. It was 2-a-days. It was 3-hour practices in the heat. It was just drive them into the dirt and build toughness. And Les Miles had a lot of teams that were really good at the line of scrimmage, and they ran the ball and they played good defense. But a lot of teams that got really worn down as well late in the season because they didn't have their legs, because it was an old school mindset. I think this is taking into account all the technology that you have. Like sometimes if you follow LSU on social media, you'll see some of the photos of the players shirtless and they're wearing what looks like a sports bra. That's a monitor system that measures heart rate and their blood pressure and their hydration levels and their speed at which they're running. So all of this is so scientifically engineered for max performance. It's hard to go against those things as long as they stay healthy and they're ready to roll come the start of the season. So that's why they've approached it the way that they have. And naturally, Brian Kelly was asked about the changes that they've made this offseason in looking toward going, as he's continued to say, 1-0 against Clemson.
If you're just reacting to not having a win in the opener, to feeding them chicken wings instead of, steak, then you're reacting in a manner that doesn't give you an opportunity to be successful. We've addressed this in January. We addressed it with the guys that we brought in. We addressed it in the way we trained our football team. We addressed it in spring ball and then into our off season. And again, we've made it pretty known, what our goal is. And our goal is to go 1-0. And so if there's anything that is slightly different from in years past, it's that we were so much more intentional about getting to August 31st in January. And that focus has remained the same for the last 7.5 months.
It's an interesting way to put it, and we can debate it and will debate it up until and after that game against Clemson on August the 30th. If the result is a good one for LSU, then we're going to say, eureka, they figured it out. If it's not, a lot of people are going to point and say, why did you put so much focus on Clemson? You oversold it. You overhyped it. Your guys got in their head. And I don't know what's right or wrong. What I do know is Brian Kelly's been a coach for a long time. He's won a lot of games, and he and his staff are approaching it this way. And I don't necessarily think it's wrong to do that when you've done it a different way and not had a good result. So it's, like I said, it's not about changing up arbitrary things. It's about changing your process and approach to things to hopefully have you ready to go and ready to roll for that season opener. Now, ultimately, if LSU does beat Clemson, and if they go on to do great things like we think they can this year, it's going to be on the shoulders of Garrett Nussmeier, who, as you've heard us say here, is the leading returning passer in college football. And the one thing he didn't have a year ago that he has now is experience, having started a full season. One of the big questions that everyone asks is, will Garrett Nussmeier actually run the football? Now, Brian Kelly wasn't asked about Nuss running the ball. He was asked about Nussmeier's development, something he's talked a ton about. But he did drop another breadcrumb here about Nuss running. So I want you to listen for that here in this soundbite. And on the backside of the soundbite, I'm going to make a prediction about Garrett Nussmeier that we're going to mark, and we will come back and talk about at the end of the season. Here you go.
His worst play needs to be 0. And that's okay. 0 is okay. We can live with 0. What we can't live with is, catastrophic mistakes. And I think you have to live through that to know what your limits are, right? And so I think he knows what those limits are in terms of, managing a bad play and making it 0. I think that's experience. I think physically he's taking care of his body, so he understands that, he ran 21.4 miles per hour. I mean, that's high 4.5s. He can run. So I think he clearly understands that when the opportunity arises, that he can take off and be an effective runner. So I think that's the growth. And then just the technical things, right? I mean, on-time throws, never turn down a profit, meaning if there's a check down, check it down. It doesn't have to always be down the field. So I think that's experience. I think some of it's technical. And I think he's in a great position to do that.
Make your worst play 0, always turn a profit. Some coach speak lines that when they're embedded in the quarterback's brain over and over and over again, sometimes they start to resonate. Again, when your worst play is 0, that's an incomplete pass. That's getting back to the line of scrimmage. That's throwing it away. That's not creating a negative play, which sometimes Garrett did. And then you heard him talk about always turn a profit. Instead of forcing the ball downfield, take the check down, throw it in the flat to Harlan Berry, throw it in the flat to Caden Durham, pick up 5-6 yards and live to play another down. The part, though, that he talked about was timing him, and he ran over 21 miles an hour, which means Garrett runs a 4.5 40, upper 4.5s. That's moving. That's not elite top-end speed for a running back or a wide receiver, but that's still elite speed at a 4.5, a sub 4.6 40. Garrett Nussmeier is a great athlete. He can run. But in his career, Garrett Nussmeier has run 41 times in his career for right at negative 100 yards. It's like negative 97 yards. And again, it's sack adjusted. So those rushing attempts include the times he's been sacked, and the rushing yardage is sack adjusted because college athletics count rushing sacks as rushing stats, which is stupid. It should just be a team loss like in the NFL. But anyway, I'm going to make a prediction that Garrett Nussmeier this year will rush for a plus 100 yards. Now, you might say that's not outlandish, but keep in mind, last year, Garrett Nussmeier ran 34 times for negative 38. Negative 38. Now, it's a sack-adjusted yards, but the point is he just didn't run the football. I think he will take those opportunities. I'm not telling you Garrett Nussmeier is going to rip off 20, 30, 40 yards. He's not going to be Jaden Daniels. He's not going to be Joe Burrow. Remember, in Joe Burrow's last season at LSU in 2019, Burrow ran 115 times for 368 yards. 115 for 368. So I think Nuss isn't going to be that, but can he be a third of that? And can he be the move the chains guy on 3rd and 4? And I think he will be. And I think Nuss will turn that number around completely in his final season in Baton Rouge. So mark the tape. We'll come back to it after the season. I do think just as much as they've talked about it, Nuss has talked about it, Sloan's creativity in the run game. I shared with you a play that we got to see in spring ball where they called Nuss's number on a zone read where it was a design quarterback run around right end. He ripped off a 20-yarder. They, in the spring scrimmage that everybody saw in a goal line scenario, they ran a quarterback draw and Nuss ran it in. He scored 3 touchdowns a year ago, by the way. I do think that it's not going to be a giant part of the offense, but it is going to be part of the offense this year. And Nussmeier will become more valuable running the football in 2025. Now, of course, his greatest value is going to be throwing the ball and throwing the ball to a bevy of wide receivers, a group that Brian Kelly said is the deepest he has ever coached. You'll hear his words when we continue. Locked on LSU, your team every day. If you're trying to stay on top of your routine, whether it's workouts, long days on campus, staying focused through back-to-back classes, hydration is where it all starts. And that's where DripDrop comes in. When you're on top of your hydration, you'll notice that everything works better. Your energy, your mood, your focus, even your skin. But getting enough fluids every day isn't always easy. That's why you need DripDrop. DripDrop is doctor-developed and scientifically proven for fast hydration. It uses the perfect balance of sodium electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb fluids quickly, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of a leading sports drink. So find your favorite flavor. If you've tried a bunch of different electrolyte powders, there's nothing that tastes as good as or works as fast as DripDrop. So right now, DripDrop is offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first order. So just head to DripDrop.com. That's DripDrop.com and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege. That's DripDrop.com. Promo code LOCKEDONCollege for 20% off. Stock up now before the heat hits hard. So Garrett Nussmeier and these receivers are something we have talked a lot about, and notably, if LSU had gone into this offseason and not added a receiver in the transfer portal, I wouldn't have thought anything of it. Aaron Anderson's returning, your leading receiver from a season ago. Chris Hilton, who when finally healthy, scored touchdowns in 3 consecutive games at the end of last season and is certainly a blow-the-top off the defense type guy. Xavier Thomas has been a really good boundary receiver for you. Kyle Parker was a freshman a season ago, and when Chris Hilton got injured, he was playing meaningful snaps against USC, caught a beautiful touchdown against UCLA. Kyle Parker can play at this level. And then you got young talented guys like Kylan Billiard and Jelani Watkins. My goodness, Teron Francis, a freshman, made the catch of the day on DJ Pickett in the first practice. You already had a bevy of receivers. And then you went and added Nick Anderson, who 2 years ago when he was healthy at Oklahoma averaged 21 yards a reception. And Barrion Brown, who was an All-American 2 years ago, and somehow Kentucky, due to coaching malpractice, just forgot how to use this super dynamic guy. And you added both of them to what was already a deep receiving core. And Brian Kelly effectively said, yeah, this is the best unit he's ever had.
We have 8 SEC high-caliber receivers. These guys are really good football players. And so it's incumbent upon us to put them in a position to succeed for themselves and for our team. I think that's the biggest management right now is doing that. And then being smart, right? You know, and when you have that kind of depth, you can lessen the player load for these guys across the board and keep them fresh. And so What we've told them is it's 1A, 1B. I mean, and we're going to be rolling guys in and out, but I would be less than honest if I didn't say it's as deep as I've ever had. Now we got to go play.
I don't think that's hyperbole. I don't think that's an exaggeration. I went and looked this up. If you looked at what is the greatest offense LSU's ever had, well, it was 2019, right? That's the greatest offense in the history of college football. That team had 9 receivers that caught a pass, not 9 pass catchers, 9 wide receivers. That's not counting Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Thaddeus Moss. That's 9 wide receivers that caught a pass. Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Terrace Marshall, Racey McMath, Derek Dillon, John Trey Kirkland, Jeray Jenkins, Devontae Lee before he moved to safety, and then Trey Palmer. That was 9 receivers that caught a pass. Now, you blew the doors off of everybody, so you had a lot of mop-up duty, and guys got in there. But still, 9. Look at whatever you might consider the other great offense, 2023. 2023, LSU led the country in total offense and scoring offense. Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, Kyron Lacey, Chris Hilton, Aaron Anderson. That's it. You had 5 wide receivers that caught passes that year. 2011, great team. Ruben Randall, Odell, Russell Shepard, Kadron Boone, Jarvis Landry, James Wright. 6. Great offense. 6 wide receivers caught passes. Go back to 2006. Remember, you had Dwayne Bowe and Buster Davis, who were both first-round picks that year. Bowe, Davis, Early Doucette, Brandon LaFell, Jared Mitchell, Chris Mitchell. 6. 2019 LSU is 9. Brian Kelly's sitting there telling you he feels like he's got 8 caliber SEC wide receivers, and he's not wrong. Aaron Anderson, Xavier Thomas, Chris Hilton all returned. That's 3 that you know could play this level. Nick Anderson showed it 2 years ago at Oklahoma when he was healthy. Berrien Brown obviously is one of those guys. I mean, he's an All-American in Kentucky a couple of years ago. Destin Hill coming in from Florida State, who probably had the best day of any of the receivers day one in camp. He is going to play, by the way. I mean, he is a physical specimen who is a physical blocker, great hands, can catch the ball in space. He's basically what C.J. Daniels was a year ago for this team. That's 6. You heard Brian Kelly just say Kyle Parker can play. That's 7. Then you've still got Kylan Billiot, Jelani Watkins, Teron Francis, Phillip Wright. You've got dudes here. No shortage of them. You have really good players that aren't going to play because you just have so much depth and talent there. And so Brian Kelly's not wrong when he talks about that. Now, what you also have clearly is what you didn't have a year ago. When Chris Hilton got hurt, remember, LSU struggled to find the guy that could stretch the field. That was a big problem for last year's offense. Well, with Chris Hilton and Berrien Brown, it's very obvious you don't have that problem this year.
You've got 2 guys that can play that X position that can run past anybody, whether it's a go, a post, a dig, and that is an incredible weapon. And it allows us, as I said earlier, is to lower the player load. You know, they're A and B, right? They're going to get a lot of touches and a lot of snaps. And then you add Aaron Anderson, who's the ultimate playmaker. Look, we have to be careful with all of our players, but, we want to keep Aaron ready for Saturdays too. And so you got Kyle Parker, who I am really high on, and I think he's going to have an incredible year. But now you can add Kyle Parker to the slot. And then into the boundary, you got Xavion, you've got Nick Anderson. You've got some depth there, but the real deal here is that we're going to get over the top of a lot of defenses with those 2 guys.
Chris Hilton, Berrien Brown, both had big plays deep on the first day. Literally the first team period, Berrien Brown scored a 40-yard touchdown, burning Ashton Stamps by 2-3 yards, and Nuss dropped it in the bucket. It was incredible. I mean, you are not going to have a problem, and that's not even to talk about a guy like Jelani Watkins, who's quite literally the fastest man in college football, a track star who's now coming back to football. I mean, he may be Trendon Holiday. He may only get 3 touches a game, but if they're explosive touchdowns that flip the field or change the scoreboard, awesome. Yes, an embarrassment of riches. Now, when we gave you our camp preview, and I told you there were 4 things that I was watching, Brian Kelly addressed 2 of them. Well, he addressed all 4, actually. But 2 in particular I want to talk about when we wrap up next. Locked in LSU, your team every day. The most noteworthy item to come out of Brian Kelly's press conference is confirmation that you have one of the 5 starting jobs on your offensive line locked down. Remember, I told you there was 4 things. If you missed our episode, go back and watch it, the fall camp preview. I told you there's 4 things I was watching. Offensive line, safety, Kyle Williams, which we just haven't talked enough about because of the great job Bo Davis did a year ago. Go back and listen to that episode if you missed it. And then obviously the health of guys like Harold Perkins and Jacoby and Guillory, Jordan Gilbert, their ability to be ready right away. In some respect, Brian Kelly addressed all those, but while they're still figuring out the offensive line, one thing is absolutely locked in. Listen.
Well, we're still competing for positions, right? You saw what we did. Braelin Moore moved into the center position. DJ Chester moved to left guard, so you guys can figure that one out. But DJ is going to compete, with Paul. And on the right side, Josh is going to compete with Colin Eccles. That's competition. Karis Kern is going to push Tyree. Bordelon's going to push Weston Davis. I think that, those are pretty much, what you should be seeing and how that will move. There'll be some times that maybe DJ, slides in at center. We got a guy that played 13 games at center. Let's keep him sharp. So I think you'll see some moving around there, but there's competitive battles right now on that offensive line. So we have to evaluate them as a group at 5 and then individually who makes up that best 5. So I think you'll see some of that happen over the next couple of weeks.
You'll see rotation, and I get that. But what Brian Kelly told you at the beginning of that bye when he said, we move Braelin Moore to center and DJ to guard, you guys can figure that out. He's telling you Braelin Moore is the starting center, and DJ Chester is competing with Paul Mabenga at left guard. And Cohen Eccles, who would be the backup center, is competing at right guard with Josh Thompson. You heard Brian Kelly call their names specifically in those spots. And then he told you who the starters were at tackle and who's backing them up and who's competing for those jobs. So if something, God forbid, were to happen to Braelin Moore, DJ Chester would slide in and play center. But Braelin Moore is your starting center. You're starting putting together your offensive line knowing your battery is complete. It's Braelin Moore, Garrett Nussmeier. The same thing I told you 3 years ago when Brian Kelly came here. I guess almost 4 now, but it's calendar years. But when Brian Kelly came here and they brought in Jaden Daniels, I told you they didn't bring in Jaden Daniels to sit. That was not a popular opinion at the time because Miles Brennan was the fan favorite. And I told you Brian Kelly took this job. He knew what he had in Miles Brennan, and he went and got Jaden Daniels. He knew what he had, and he knew what he was bringing in, and the guy he brought in was going to start. They knew what they had in DJ Chester. They brought in Braelin Moore. It was telling you they needed to be better at center. They went and got a true center, and now DJ Chester can play his true natural position of guard. So Braelin Moore is your starting center. Braelin Moore will be the starting center against Clemson when they go play on August 30th in Clemson, South Carolina. The other 4 spots are up for grabs, but they lined them up initially exactly how we said they would. Not rocket science, just pretty obvious what they were looking to do, and you could read the tea leaves. The other thing that was interesting is the Kyle Williams component of it, because Kyle Williams is taking over running this defensive line, and he's just doing it in a fundamentally different way than Bo Davis and the way he recruited and what the expectation is of defensive linemen. Bo Davis wanted big space eaters to eat up blocks so linebackers could roam and make plays. Kyle Williams wants defensive linemen that are going to be fast, active, and go make plays. And my goodness, one guy that they're very high on is Dom McKinley, the former 5-star entering his sophomore season.
Well, he's forced our athletic development staff, our training staff, athletic training and weight training. We ran out of weights for him to max squat. He was 650 pounds max squat. And so I just throw that out to you as how powerful he is. And he's such a great kid. He's so grounded. He wants to get better every single day. And he has elite, strength and numbers from that perspective. So, yeah, he's going to play a major role in what we do. He's still learning. Coach Williams has got him with him right on his hip every day, but he's enjoyable to coach.
The part where he said at the end, Coach Williams has him on his hip every day, there was a part during the indoor component when they were doing individual drills where Kyle Williams had 4 defensive tackles with him. It was Dominic McKinley, Ahmad Bro, Jacobian Guillory, and Bernard Gooden, the transfer from South Florida. The rest of the defensive tackles were working with I couldn't tell if it was a grad assistant or an analyst that's working with the defensive line. Forgive me, just a different part of the field where we couldn't be. But it's very obvious. Kyle Williams was working specifically with those 4 guys, which tells you primarily those are going to be the 4 guys they rely on and are trying to get up to speed very quickly with what the expectation is. Look, Ahmad Bro played for Kyle Williams at Ruston High. Bernard Gooden was handpicked by Kyle Williams to come in after the spring portal. Jacoby Guillory's in his 6th season, and Don McKinley was a 5-star number 1 defensive tackle in the country. It's a really good starting point. And then you got a ton of beef behind those guys as well, namely with guys like Sadir Mitchell coming in via the portal. No shortage in numbers or talent, just about molding that ball of clay now over these next 4 weeks before you head to Clemson, South Carolina. And of course, we'll be here covering it all the way along. So just to kind of set up the rest of the week and how it'll go. So LSU will be back on the practice field on Thursday morning. Media will only get about 15 minutes of viewing on Thursday. LSU will practice Friday, although no media availability. And then Saturday, a full practice, and the media will have the full availability. So I encourage you, if you're new, please subscribe to the channel, subscribe on your favorite podcast app. If you know an LSU fan who isn't aware of the show, let them know, because it's a great time to join us. Every time they give us media availability, as soon as that practice ends, I'm going to fire up Locked On, and I'm going to get you an episode published with my observations just as soon as we possibly can. So make sure you're here for it. And thank you for making this your first listen every single day. So please subscribe on your favorite podcast app, rate us, leave a review. And if you're on YouTube, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. And be sure to let a friend know that if they love the Tigers, we got you here every single day. It is Locked On LSU, your team every day.